But what I'd like to do is just take a moment to introduce myself and some of my colleagues. My name is Gary Hosey. I'm the founder and managing director at the Emotional Intelligence Company. We've got our stand outside. We're a European distribution partner with MHS Assessments, who publish the EQI assessments, and we've been certifying professionals. Please, Julia, come and join us. Certifying professionals and HR, L&D professionals now since 2011. We've run over 100 certifications. We work worldwide in a leadership population of all sorts of organisations and multiple sectors. So if you're interested to know more specific about that, then please do ask us about that. What is a real passion for us is about building positive culture. And behaviour and performance is a key contributor to that. You know all about that. We've been focused towards that all day. And for us, it's about inspiring change at an everyday level. It's about engaging with meaningful conversations in everyday situations. So what we want to do in this session is give you a couple of slants of what does that actually look like. So I'll introduce Mike in a second, but we've got a current client, which is Hitachi Rail's Julia Potts, and we'll introduce Julia in a second. But first of all, Mike Perrett. Mike started out as a client how many decades ago?
20 years ago.
20 years ago. So started out as a client in BAE Systems. So be aware that on the publication that it talks about us working with a client currently in BAE Systems, that person was unable to make the show due to a last-minute challenge. So Mike stepped up to the plate, but there is some BAE history there for us. Mike also has had some other roles and is now one of our senior associates and uses EQI in that. So I'm going to get Mike up to the stage. What I would say about Mike is he does step up to the stage. He's a bit like me. He's vertically challenged, but he's also a consummate professional to the highest integrity in everything that he does. He's certainly a pleasure to work with, and he's great fun too. So I'll let Mike share his journey with you. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Gary, for that introduction, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. What I'd like to do is just give you a little bit of a view on, let's see if we can get this. Oh, it's Gary's slides.
Should be on. Go back a bit.
There we go. Just really wanted to give you this afternoon a little bit of a personal reflection in terms of the impact that emotional intelligence has had for me in the transition from a recipient into a practitioner, and to give you some idea of how that has felt and how that's evolved over time. The quotation there, I think, starts to highlight a little bit of what I want to talk about, which is uncovering the unseen. And that's what I really feel in my experience of emotional intelligence has been the activity that I've been engaged upon, and the benefits that that has had for me and for the people that I've been working with. I started that journey, thanks to Gary, some 20 years ago, and this presentation will just outline some of that journey and some of the key points that I've picked up on as I've gone through that. But I hope you'll find it practical in the sense that it's an application of emotional intelligence within a working environment. The first thing I'd like to do is just to illustrate that journey, and journey seems to be a word throughout today has been associated with emotional intelligence. Illustrate that journey by saying that was my original first 1994 mobile phone. And this is my latest acquisition. You can all go, ooh, because it's an iPhone 11 Pro. And that's my journey. And I'd like to just think about it. At first glance, those two don't seem too dissimilar. They're a similar height, similar colouring. The younger one is slightly slimmer. The older one's put on a little bit of weight. But apart from that, at face value, they may seem very similar. But as we all know, the change that has taken place is on the inside. The view that I have from that phone, of the inside of that phone, is very restricted and constrained. The view I have from this one has enlarged and expanded dramatically over those few years. And that's really the substance of what I'd like to talk about today. My journey has led me to consider how we uncover the unseen, both for me personally, but also for the individuals and for the organizations that I worked with. Understanding who we are as individuals and how we relate to others is fundamental to our interpretation of behaviours and the impact that they can have on our capabilities and our ability to function and to contribute. Businesses and organisations have continually evolved over time. They've got new markets, new technologies, new innovation that has been going on. For me, there has been, and I have seen it over the 40 years I've been working in industry, a significant shift in the workplace environment. A workplace that was dominated by the organisation when I first went into it has now moved and shifted to be much more focused on the individual and led by the individual. And I think that's a significant change in the way in which we need to now approach both individuals and organisations in the workplace. Also, within that, there has been a change in the way in which capabilities and skills have been understood and related to. Originally, it was all about what trade you did, what skill you did, what skill you have. But now it's much more about not just that, what capabilities you can offer, but it's the competencies that go with those capabilities. So how do I deliver what I'm good at? It's not just about talking about the what, it's much more about how we deliver that. And I'll illustrate that. We had to transfer a load of Airbus work out to Malaysia, carbon composite manufacturing, and we were looking at which engineers would be best suited to that task. And we ended up with 2 engineers, both very skilled, very experienced, very knowledgeable, but we chose one over the other. The reason being their competence, their ability to work in that overseas environment under their own steam, with limited support, having to make decisions on their own, and having to refer back only when needed to the organisation. Having to adapt and adopt new cultures, new environments, new practices. And that, for me, made the distinction. It wasn't about the skill set, it was about the competence to deliver it. We make much of our vision statements and our value statements, but you come back to how can you train an individual to be innovative, to be creative, to be flexible or inspirational or collaborative? You can't train people to do that. All you can do is to encourage the behaviours and the environment in which those things will flourish. And so what I've been doing a lot in the past, and much more so today, is about how we apply that to individuals within organisations for the benefit of the organisation overall. It comes back to what is going on the inside that is unseen, that is important. Our task as leaders of change is to help to create the environment for success in which individuals can flourish and contribute both for themselves and the organisations they represent. As I say, over a career spanning 40 years, I've seen many things that have impacted change in my workplace. Major events that have flowed down to impact the environment in which I've been working. And you can see some of them there, all the way from the Falklands War through 9/11. 9/11, we saw a 30% reduction overnight in aircraft orders. We had to redo the whole of the manufacturing strategy and the whole of the business strategy in 24 hours in order to present back to our clients. So significant change brings about often the stimulation for change within an organization. That external change is the driver. And somebody asked a question in one of the earlier sessions, what is it that motivates organizations to undertake change? And it's often not things that they were expecting or wanting, but in things that occur in the environment. And those crises, unfortunately, are often the catalyst and the trigger for change. In matrix organizations in particular, a lot of the issues don't occur in organizations in the processes. They occur at the boundaries between the processes and the functions. That's where the heads-to-heads starts to happen. Also, I've found that it's relatively easy to initiate change and transformation in a greenfield site. In all due respect to Hitachi, you take something and build it from ground up. You can bring in your own processes, your own training, your own development, and then you recruit people into that environment. When you're on a brownfield site, as many of the organizations I've worked with are, you've got that historic legacy culture, and that takes a completely different set of attributes in terms of facilitation, in terms of managing that change process and that transformation than setting up from a greenfield site. For me, I developed my understanding and my awareness through, like many of you probably have, through other tool sets, through Belbin and through Myers-Briggs and so on. The reason I started to get passionate and interested about emotional intelligence was that I began to see some of the advantages that brought with it. It was a whole life view. You weren't expected to hang up your life at the door peg when you came into work and not talk about it and not have it influence or people understand how it impacted your work environment. We were looking at the whole person. It helped me in terms of understanding that it was more than just understanding me, but how I interrelated with the other people around me and what my behaviours did to them and how that changed them. So there were aspects to emotional intelligence which started to move me forward from where I had been. And as I started to work in transformation, it became a tool set that I wanted to adopt because I found it helpful in understanding not just the senior management teams I was working with, but the people in the business who were expected to enact what these small group of people sat away in a hotel somewhere had created for them to deliver. And it was that awareness of how is this going to go down with the troops that made the difference. In BAE Systems, I was involved in a program called Benchmark BAE. At the time, the biggest change program ever undertaken in the UK company. 20 of us were selected out of the business to be facilitators, and we were equipped with training, but also we began to have the conversation about emotional intelligence in terms of how were we going to relate to the organization we were trying to assist through a transformation program. I built on that experience and that knowledge and that activity to look at changes that we were making to an aerostructures business. We were building parts, major parts for wing sets for Airbus and Boeing aircraft. We started off by making 4 aircraft a month. So any of you who traveled on an A320, we were building 4 of those a month. By the time I finished the change program, and one of the challenges we were trying to address was we were building 26 a month. Today, as I understand it, we are probably looking at 64 a month. You can see the growth and the pressures that was going to bring on the business. at the same time, we were in the process, or BAE Systems was in the process, of selling off that civil aerostructures business. And we had to take people through both sets of transformation simultaneously. The sale, and they were all being chupied out to the new company. In order to do that, we undertook an emotional intelligence assessment and activity with the senior management team to equip them to deal with their emotions prior to them having to deal with the emotions of the rest of the organization. And that was a real eye-opener. Subsequently, I've been working in part with Gary at Hitachi Rail, and you're going to hear a lot more about that. But also more recently in the National Nuclear Laboratory, working with their chief scientist and technologist and their creative technology team. And that's a difficult program for them to get through. Start up a new civil nuclear program, continuation of a submarine program, and also being innovative about how you get rid of a significant amount of nuclear waste. These are challenging organizations. Brownfield sites, very difficult. Then just to start to close that down, looking at the differences between that old mobile phone and the new iPhone, a lot of it is about the applications. You've got a screen full of apps. And that's really where I've started to move into the next level of activity, that emotional intelligence is a basis for me to provide other services into organizations. It informs and supports the work that I do in the other applications that I provide. And to do that, I have found has been really useful in helping me to understand and to encourage them to understand more about the how than just the what. The leadership get the what, where they're at a loss is the how. And often big consultancy companies are good at coming in 16 weeks, a couple of million quid later, giving you, there's the what, that's what you need to go away and do, guys. And then they walk out the door and you go, yeah, that's great, like that, but how am I going to deliver it? How do I enact that change? So that's my journey personally in a work environment, in an organizational environment. I'd just like to take one example of how that's worked in a personal environment. My daughter came to me and said, Dad, I've got an opportunity for a new job. It's a massive step up from where I am, and I want to have some way of understanding how I can communicate how I am different from the other candidates. So I said, well, shall we go through the emotional intelligence stuff with you, and you can understand a bit of that. And she said, yeah, that'd be great. So I took her through the model, we talked about it, I did all the coaching, and she went into the interview, and she got that classic question, tell us, what are your strengths and weaknesses? And normally she would have said, oh, my strengths, I get on well with people, and my weakness, chocolate. But actually what she said to them was, I have 3 key areas where I'm really high performing. I can describe them to you. They're in these areas. I know that because it's been validated through a 360. I've talked with other people. They've given me their feedback. It's been genuine. I've pursued that feedback in terms of my understanding about where the cost of highs are, where are the things that I do well, but I've got to be cautious. But I also understand how that can contribute to making me a more effective individual in your organization. I've also looked at the other areas where I can improve. I haven't tried to improve across all 5 of those areas. I've selected one. I've been working on that over the last 12 months, and here are some of the results from the 360 feedback I've done recently. These have been validated, again, independently. These are people's views on where I am. And I want to carry this on and take it forward, but I believe it equips me to be far more effective and better in the environment. And working for you, I believe I can demonstrate that, not only in what I do, and you've seen my skill set, but in how I apply it in the organization. I was excited when she rang me and said, "Dad, I got the job." I thought, well done, that's my girl. But she said a few weeks afterwards that she was talking with one of the people who had been on the interview panel, and they said to her, "You know, your answer to that question about your strengths and weaknesses was the most comprehensive and compelling answer we have ever had to that question." And I thought, well, yeah, that is really powerful for her, for the organisation, and for her ability to contribute. As I said, emotional intelligence is a major part of my journey. It's given me a common language, and it gives you and us and the organisations we work in a common language in which to explore our behaviours. You're going to hear a lot more detail now about Hitachi Rail just down the road, what they've been doing to take that forward. But I'd like to just finish on this quote. It's about us going forward and working hard to uncover the unseen, both from a personal perspective, for the people we work with, and for the organisations they contribute to. Thank you very much for listening and for your time.
Absolutely delighted that Julia Potts has joined me from the head of HR Manufacturing at Hitachi Rail Limited. Thank you. We've had the privilege of working with Hitachi since 2014 when they were a small group of about 30 people in one office. And I'll let Julia tell you where it got to from there. But one of the things that we've focused on as part of our work with emotional intelligence is actually using it as part of the recruitment process. And that's part of where Julia and her team have really excelled with things. Better get the clicker here. Thank you. So some of the key areas where we've been involved with emotional intelligence, as I've mentioned, is around the recruitment, but also with one-to-one coaching and working with the senior leadership team as well. But I wanted to focus just as a quick introduction before we kind of open it up for some questions around, what did we do with the EQI and emotional intelligence? Well, the first thing we did is we mapped the subscales to the 10 values that Hitachi had identified as part of their value set within the organisation. We put 3 subscales with each of the 10 values, and that enabled us to give a comprehensive perspective about how their behaviour related to the individual values. So, as well as, I'll go back one there. As well as the 10 values, we found that there were 5 subscales that really circumnavigated all of the values. That was self-regard and confidence, emotional self-awareness, emotional expression, impulse control, stress tolerance, happiness and well-being. And if you want to find out more about those, happy to chat afterwards. So we were able to give a very comprehensive perspective. What did that look like in real terms? Well, what you can see on the slide there is an example of one of the values. You can see the subscales that we mapped to that value, so one of them being clear and upfront. The blues indicate the effective aspects of the emotional intelligence subscale that attributed to that value. The green was the effective areas that might have also a cost of high impact, where it might overplay and have a more negative impact on occasion. For those of you that were in my presentation earlier, that was those 2 red arrows I was talking about that sometimes and occasionally occur. And then the red is a lower scoring area that might have a more negative impact to their overall functioning. And what this enabled the organisation to do as part of the recruitment process was to, in a second interview kind of context, really unpack things, and Julia will tell us how that actually unfolded. Another example of the values is tackling the difficult issues. And again, we can see that on this particular example, there are a couple of red areas and one effective area. So it's giving some very rich and deep information about how that value might impact this particular role. So with that kind of framing of things, what we wanted to do was just kind of frame some questions that we're going to invite Julia to kind of just freely chat about. And if you have got a question that you'd like to fire forwards, then please feel free to do that as well. So picking up on where we talked about EQI with recruitment, Julia, I'll hand the baton over to you to give a view.
Yes. Well, if I go back a little bit,
Okay.
when I first started at Hitachi Rail, it was literally like 4 of us in an office in the Excel Centre, and you know the factory was still a field. And one of the things that I spent a lot of time doing was talking to some of the senior people in Japan about how we could live and breathe the values of harmony, sincerity, pioneer, and spirit. Because, you know, that was the only train factory that Hitachi had was this factory in Japan. They'd been there for nearly 100 years. And they had all these, you know, everybody, if anybody's ever been to Japan, it's a specific type of behaviour that people have, which is, what's the word I'm looking for?
Quite traditional.
It is quite traditional, but everybody's very respectful to each other. And I think they wanted some reassurance from me that not only could we build trains, but we could treat people in the right way. So it was a conversation that I had with Gary at a business event in Newton Aycliffe that I was telling him about, you know, how we wanted to develop these behaviours that matched all these values. And it was, you know, Gary's idea to look at the EQI and see how we could use the EQI tool for our recruitment. So the first batch of supervisory staff that we were hiring, we decided that this would be a good pilot, if you like, to see how this would work. And so that's what we did. Gary, you know, took the lead and developed these how the elements of the EQI mapped to the behaviours and the values that we wanted. So that's when we started using it. That was actually the catalyst for really assessing behaviours of all the people we hired. You know, we even down to the people who would be building the trains, we were looking at their values and behaviours before we even started looking at transferable skills in the recruitment process. So it became a very important tool, not only with the EQI, but just on using it for behaviours.
And what was your experience?
So you get all different. I think that.
Am I on here? Yeah. And what was your experience of actually using the framework in the interview process as part of the recruitment?
This was really quite, it was quite eye-opening at first because, you know, as part of the development of this process, Gary had obviously done the EQI tool on me and I had feedback and, you know, it is quite amazing how accurate it is. And developing the interview questions from somebody's profile was very eye-opening because as soon as he asked somebody, an interview candidate, a specific question, they were literally like, they were almost aghast. How could you possibly know to ask me that particular question? We ended up having these particular questions based on somebody's profile that we could really focus in on how they would act in a certain situation, what the behaviour was like. And there was one particular incident where, you know, the guy actually laughed out loud when I asked him the question because he was like, how can you possibly know that? How can you possibly know to ask me that question? And we had numerous incidents like that, and it was, you know, really great to get that deep insight into somebody. And we did hire people who, you know, we asked these difficult questions. They didn't necessarily have all of the high scores on every aspect of the EQI. But what we did is we then used it when we did hire some people. We recognised what they had, and we used it as a development tool for them after they joined us. So really useful from that point of view.
And what about others in the business? Because obviously we were focusing it around the recruitment piece, and you know it has gone wider. What about that?
It has, and there was one particular person within our organisation who was very sceptical about emotional intelligence and the use of the EQI tool. And again, Gary got him to complete the questionnaire and gave him the feedback. And again, he was really sold on it, how accurate it was. Again, you know, he was like, how can you know all this about me just by asking me those few questions? And he became a real advocate for it in the business. And, you know, if you've got anybody, you know, we heard earlier on, you know, I think there was a question earlier on about, you know, somebody being sceptical in your organisation, or how do you get your organisation to adopt this approach? Do something like this, because it was fantastic. You know, he ended up being really pushing it through the organisation, and it became a real driver. He became a real driver for it in the organisation.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask the question, you know, what did your team achieve with this approach?
It's a loaded question.
It is. I know the answer. I do.
So our particular team we've got a great team within the HR department. Most of them have been there, you know, almost as long as I have. You know, we've gradually built up the team, but we have got a fantastic team in HR, and they're all really passionate about this approach within the organisation. And I do believe that we have, as far as we can in any organisation, we have got great values and behaviours. You know, it's not 100% perfect all the time, but it is, you know, I think I had this vision about what I wanted the workplace to be like, and how I wanted to be that respectful organisation, and the way we treated each other would be great. And the team, my team, are real great advocates for that. And I, in 2017, I did enter us for the CIPD Team of the Year Awards, and we won. So,
and there they are. The whole team.
Most of those people in that photograph are still in my team today. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, a great attribute to Julia's leadership as well. And it's been a real privilege to be on a long-term journey with that. And we're really happy to answer any more detailed questions. I know we're going to try and cut short a little bit of time to save time on the timetable and keep to everyone's overall time. But some of the other areas that we've been involved in has been the one-to-one coaching, as Julia has mentioned. But the other aspect, which is... again, for those of you that were with me earlier, one of my 10-year pictures, and that's a journey that we might take people on around emotional intelligence. And quite often we would start with understanding, with a blank piece of paper, what is the actual need, you know, what is required. Just as Julia has said, there was a requirement to support their recruitment function. And what were the numbers? Where did you went from the 30, and where did you finish up? Because they're quite remarkable. Where did you finish up on your recruitment numbers altogether?
How many EQIs have we?
Well, we've done over 120, but overall you went from 30 to what was the total workforce?
Oh yes, we have been up to over 1,200 in the workforce at one point, and we've adopted that sort of values and behaviours-led approach, and obviously continued it throughout the development as well, as you mentioned, the coaching and the leadership development that we've done. And it's really, it's a sort of, it's a way of life now within our organisation, that this is how we do things. You know, everything we do builds on those values and behaviours. And you know, it started with a sort of chance meeting of Gary and I. And, you know, we couldn't have done it without Gary and the team.
And the team, absolutely. No, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, everyone.